Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, it's Zoe, and I've got a heads up, ears on kind of announcement to start with today. We've got a number of different events coming up for you. We've got an online workshop, woohoo! First of the year, called Difficult Conversations. It's a perennial issue that every leader I ever work with always wants to do better and master. So that's coming up. I think it's this week, so you can still jump on board. It's an online workshop. And then we have the following week, Online Masterclass, Elite Executive Teams. This was an incredibly popular topic last year for us, and we're going to help teams and leaders dive deeper into this. And that's also online, so you can access it from anywhere, of course. And the third event we've got coming up is an Amplifiers Taster Session. Hybrid team success is the hot topic there. And that is, we have an option for an online workshop as well as a face-to-face session here in Canberra. So some awesome things coming up for you that you can hop on board. If the dates and times don't work for you, do have a look at the rest of our calendar for the year. We've got all of our events listed and you can snag a spot on any of these upcoming events. We are repeating Difficult Conversations and Elite Executive Teams throughout the year. So make sure you jump on board and grab a seat while your calendar is open and burning hot, ready to learn. You can register at Program. Go to my website, zoerouth.com, click on Programs, click on Events, and they're all there. All you have to do is register. Okay. Now, the question I have for you today is, how fit is your brain? Are you leading your teams with enough energy and with enough psychological safety? Amy Edmondson has popularized this term and really brought it to the fore. And psychological safety is the feeling that you feel okay to raise a topic or challenge an idea without fear of retribution. That is the definition of psychological safety. Without that in place, you have no hope of collaboration or innovation or any of those important team activities, whether it's a hybrid team or a regular face-to-face team. So this is pretty important. And it's especially important for hybrid teams because the tyranny of distance can invoke suspicion. So we absolutely need to have brain fitness and also psychological safety. And my guest today is an expert in this area. Her name is Dr. Sam Mather. She's from the UK. She's a neuroscience practitioner, author, and coach. She has 2 books out. Rise, which is all about is about brain fitness and resilience for individuals. And then Rise Together, which is all about creating psychological safety together as a team. She's worked with the United Nations, Dell, Kraft Heinz, and Fujitsu. She has a PhD in Organisational Psychology, and she specializes in psychological safety and resilience. And tying those two together is absolutely brilliant. So let's get on to it. On with the show. Woohoo! All the way from Reading, United Kingdom, we have Sam Mather. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It is really exciting. I know you've gotten up early and to be here from the other side of the planet. And I always love to ask guests, how did you get to where you are today? You don't wake up and all of a sudden become an international best-selling author. So how did you get started in this field? How did you end up here?
Passion. That's how I ended up here. I started, like most people, when I did business studies initially because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life at 18. Like most of us, fell into something I loved doing, which was learning and development, and then stayed in learning development and just moved through organizations. And as with most organizations, when they see you good at something, they then promote you. And then you keep getting promoted up through leadership until you find that you're further away from what you love doing in the first place. But I kept being promoted, which I'm grateful for. But it was when I got to that senior leadership level, I started to look around me and learn about leadership because it was new to me. So I started investigating, looked at what was going on around me, and then was curious and thought, something's not right here. What's going on here? People join organizations excited, and there's a honeymoon period. And then after about 18 months, 2 years, it starts to fade away. And it's like, well, why? What's going on? And what differentiates those who do really well versus those who don't? And the cynics versus the change agents. And it was curiosity so that led me to that. And I had the opportunity to be made redundant, and I took it. And decided
Opportunity.
it was a great
Doesn't always
opportunity.
feel like an opportunity.
Well, it allowed me to fulfill an ambition to do my PhD, and based on my 20-something years experience of corporate and leadership, I decided to study that field. And then when I came out of the studying, I wanted to tell the world about what I found, and this is where I'm at.
All right. So your PhD was on what specifically?
It was specifically on the neuroscience of psychological safety. So I was looking at, very popular with Amy Edmondson's psychological safety. However, all research so far has been done on psychological safety as a group construct. In other words, you gain your psychological safety from the leaders, your team members, and the environment that's around you. But my questioning was, well, even if we had the perfect leaders with the perfect environment and the perfect team, would that guarantee psychological safety? And the answer was no. There's still a part
What?
at the
No.
No, there's still 60% of your psychological safety comes from the environment around you, the majority. So the leaders still have a huge part to play. But there is a role for individuals to manage their own and create their own psychological safety. And if you think about that, particularly in a VUCA environment where nothing is the same and constantly changing, do you want to outsource your psychological safety to somebody else? I know I don't. I want to take some accountability. So 60% was leaders, 40% was down to the individual and their level of cognitive resources that they have. Now, this flips back to the leader, because the leader also needs to enable the individual to ensure that they have the cognitive resources and the resilience they need to be able to generate their own psychological safety. So both directly and indirectly it's the leader, but the individual has a role to play.
Oh, that's cool. I love that. So it puts the power back in your own hands, which is fantastic. So God, there's so much I want to unpack with you here. Let me ask first of all about cognitive resources for psychological safety. What does that actually mean?
Cognitive resources is essentially stuff that's in your brain. So we have a finite amount of cognitive resources. And there is argument in academia about that, but the general consensus is ego depletion theory, which is that we have a finite of resources or energy in our head, and when it's depleted, we can start to feel that and our performance drops. And we know that we get to a point where if one more person asks me something else, I'm just going to lose it. We can only deal with so much at one time. And the resources are the things that we have mentally that we can deal with to cope with it. Things like self-efficacy, optimism, resilience, hope was found to be one. Our ability to manage our attention, our attentional control, all those sorts of things are resources or tools that we have mentally to deal with whatever life throws at us. But like all toolboxes, it can only hold so many at one time.
Yeah, right. Okay. So that's interesting. How do you quantify? Can you quantify this amount of resourcefulness in your brain?
There are lots of academic sort of questionnaires and all those sorts of things. And there is, but the challenge with those are they're often self-rated. And also you have the piece around people are as resilient, it varies. It varies both from a biological perspective. So our stress resilience is actually set in the womb. Our HPA axis is set in the room in terms of how tolerant we are. But then there's also experience and resilience and your upbringing, and have you been taught to fail and bounce back? So It's a really subjective thing. Things that I could deal with, someone else couldn't, and vice versa.
How the hell is stress resilience set in the womb? What happens there?
It's the HPA axis, so it's a tolerance. So if you think about stress is actually a biological response. So it's the amount of cortisol and adrenaline that's in your body. And then what happens is while a child is gestating, the mother has very high cortisol and adrenaline running at that time. That impacts the tolerance that passes on to the child, basically. So they're born with already a high set of stress and tolerance. So that when we talk about children who've been disadvantaged from disadvantaged backgrounds, they're already operating at a stress response. They're already hyper aware of potential threats. And therefore, unless they're taught otherwise, they can be much more sensitive to any response, any threat response, and already start on the back foot, really. They've already, some of their resources already taken up with dealing with this ingrained threat that they were born with.
Wow, that's amazing. So I've always thought there was something about that. It makes sense, right? You're so connected to your mother when you're in the womb. I had a friend who was pregnant when her partner suddenly died, and she went through an entire pregnancy having to grieve her husband and all that. And the baby was born, and I met the child a few years on, and she seemed a little bit stressy, like a stressy kid. And it's like, well, of course, her mother went through so much trauma when she was in utero. I can see now that biologically, of course, they pick up all that. But you talked about just then that we can be taught to manage it better. How do we do that?
So I spend a lot of time supporting and teaching people to do this. So the first thing that I do is teach people a little bit about the mechanics of the brain. So in a very simple format, to say, let me tell you what's happening in these scenarios. Let me tell you what's going on the principle that, if your car breaks down or your car's not working really well, or it's not performing, if you can tinker around under the engine a little bit, then you might be able to improve that performance. There's always a point where we may need to outsource the fixing, like we may need additional support. But if we understand the basics of mechanics, we can start to visualize and manage our brain. So I talk to people about, first of all, what your brain is responding to, why it's responding to it, and understanding how you can then start to manage your brain, not your brain manage you. Particularly in the context of leadership, where people come together and often unwittingly, organizations can create quite a threatening environment. We might not do it consciously, but the brain is hardwired to look out for threats. We have a very strong error detection mechanism in the brain, and we're constantly looking out for threats, and it's a survival mechanism which has worked really well. 9 billion of us on the planet, and as a species we're doing really well because we have this very sophisticated and highly tuned threat response.
Okay, so we can learn how to dial it down and manage it more carefully. So you talk a little bit about there's 5 hardwired threats that every brain responds to. What are they?
So I call them the 5 C's, the 5 C's of comfort. These are the things we need to feel comfortable in, otherwise we perceive it as a threat. And if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, they make sense. So in no particular order, first of all, we are primed to assume connectedness is one, for example. So it's always been safety in numbers. If we go back to our cave dwelling days, we need to be in a safety in numbers. So we need to feel connected. And this is how in-groups and out-groups form, and how people have this need to be liked and part of a group. Okay, so connectedness is one. Control is another. At any point, people feel that they're not in control. That's a sense of threat, because if you're in control of me, you might lead me off a cliff. I need to have a sense of control. Competence. So being competent used to be a matter of survival. And we know that when our competence is being questioned, we have a threat response. Just think of it when somebody wants to give you some feedback. The response people have, that response is your body's threat mechanism waking up going, hello, this could well be a problem. Consistency. Anything which is inconsistent, the brain takes a safety approach and assumes that that's a threat. So, for example, it's Friday afternoon, your boss comes to you and says, can I see you in my office Monday morning, 9:00? The threat response goes, oh, what have I done? And that's your weekend spent worrying about what you've done because it's inconsistent. Okay. And the final one is cause. So it takes a lot of energy, physical and emotional energy to keep this machine called the human body going. So I need to know why I'm investing those precious resources that we know are now limited. Why am I investing them in doing this activity? I need a purpose, I need a reason. Otherwise, I could be wasting these resources. So in other words, people need a sense of connectedness, consistency, competence, cause, and connectedness. Now, if any of them are perceived, and it doesn't have to be real, just the brain needs to perceive it as a threat, you will receive a threat response. And what I mean by that is emotions. Emotions are just messages from the brain flagging whether something is something you should move towards or away. And negative emotions say, run away.
And obviously, if we're trying to work with others, we don't want people to run away. We want them to stay at the table and participate and be engaged. So I love how you point out that 40% of psychological safety is the individual coming to the table and managing their own personal resources, self-efficacy, etc. 60% is down to the environment, of which the leader manages part of it. So in terms of creating psychological safety, which let me just check I've made the correct logical leap here. So if we are going to dial down the threats, we need to create a psychologically safe space for people. Those two are correlated, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. Win for logic. Second piece is, question for you is that how then do leaders help shape that psychologically safe experience for their teams?
So there's two pieces really. There's the piece around leading in a way that keeps the threat response low. So taking the 5 C's and thinking about how am I leading in a way that may provoke or can keep those quiet. You'll never totally eliminate it. In fact, we don't want to eliminate our threat or fear response because I know I'd end up doing something really dumb very quickly. So we need to have our threat response at a level, but not at such a high level that it starts to affect our ability to perform. So leaders need to start thinking about how can I lead, communicate, manage in a way that keeps the 5 C's comfortable. Okay. So for example, I recently did a podcast about the death of the command and control leadership. Because if you think about command and control, you lose your control, you lose your sense of connectedness, you lose your sense of competency. You know, alarm bells are going off everywhere. I'm a big advocate of coaching, proper coaching. I think if you take a coaching leadership and a servant leadership approach, you're more likely to keep these 5 C's feeling safe. And when you're feeling safe, your cortisol and adrenaline comes down. And like a seesaw, your dopamine and your serotonin, which are the smart neurotransmitters, the smart ones that allow smart thinking, they go up. So when cortisol is low, dopamine is high, and vice versa. So if you can keep people's threat response low, you'll get more likely to get more innovation, more problem solving, more smart thinking, more connectedness, because people feel safe. So there's a whole piece for leaders in terms of how they lead, how they communicate, how they connect with people. So there's a leader's piece there. But they also need to allow space for people to manage their own psychological safety as well. And some of that's really basic stuff. Like, for example, we need to keep our brain fit. If we want to be able to manage our resources, and it's very boring, and our parents were right, but we need to sleep well, 8 hours. People say, oh, I can manage on 4. Well, you can, but not forever. Eat well, exercise, hydrate, all those, keep brain fit so that it is fit enough to be able to do the more advanced techniques like focus where your attention goes. You could choose to focus on the negative or choose to focus on the positive. Switch your thinking. Right? But to do the more advanced techniques, you need to start with the basics. So that means leaders need to allow people to get home on time, take their holidays, allow them to take lunch breaks. I mean, really simple stuff. But just like you need to keep your body fit, you need to keep your brain fit.
Yeah, that makes a total sense to me for sure. So that's good. So that's good handy tips for leaders to make sure that they always keep in mind the 5 C's, dial those down, and encourage the personal brain fitness and personal resilience of their individual team members. So let's talk a little bit about the resilience piece, because there's one element is the physiological brain fitness, and then there's the inner resourcefulness piece. How do you recommend people develop resilience?
In the books, I describe it as like as the brain is like a balloon, a hot air balloon. Okay, putting aside the thoughts of my brain being full of hot air, but there is a hot air balloon, and in order to make that rise and get above the ground, off the ground, you need to put the right stuff in it. You need to put the right mix of air, oxygen, sometimes hydrogen, in order to get it off the ground. And it's the same for us. We need to put the right stuff in our brains. So when the pandemic started, I was watching all of the government. We had a government briefing, same time every day. That was great. Gave me a sense of consistency and cause and connectedness. It was great. But after a while, I had to stop watching them because they gave me a negative response. So I didn't let them in my head. I watched Cats on Skateboards on YouTube instead. It gave me a much better, more positive.
Cats on skateboards?
Yeah, they always give me good resources, good feelings. So
this prescription for resilience: cats on skateboard.
Cats on skateboard. So it's about being selective as to what goes into your brain in terms of the positive resources. So to allow that your brain to perform, be choosy what goes in. Remember that you have a finite amount of resources. So there's no such thing as work life. They're both the same, because they come from the same pot of resources. So there are times where if you have a lot going on at home and you're investing a lot of resources in dealing with personal issues, then you are going to have less at work and vice versa. So I think it's being kind to ourselves around the fact that we have a finite pot and we need to be selective on where we invest our very valuable resources. So there's always a point in life where resilience, we struggle with resilience, and there are techniques that we can do, like locus of control and understanding how we may escalate issues in our head unnecessarily. But it's being very conscious of what is going in my brain and what I'm choosing to keep out. Does this serve me? How does this serve me? And if it doesn't serve me positively, I'm going to manage that. But again, for the brain to be strong enough to do that, it needs to be fit.
Yep. Got it.
And healthy. Yeah.
Fit, healthy brain, filter what goes in, and choose where you focus. That's awesome. Yep. So you talk about, leaders communicating in a brain-friendly way. Is that to do with addressing the 5 C's, or is there a different aspect of communication that you're talking about there?
It goes back to the 5 C's. I think what we do as leaders, we use a lot of buzzwords, which sound very sort of leadership, very organization focused, but actually they create alarm. So things like, we're going to increase efficiencies. I don't know about you, but my brain's going, that means job losses, or downsizing, or right sizing, or we're going to maximize value for shareholders. All these terms, they're creating alarm in the brain. I think there's been increasing research around storytelling and being able to articulate things in a way that connect with people, not just their head, not just the logic, but their heart as well. Feelings come first and they come fast. Okay, they're stronger than logic. So if you want people to achieve something or gain something, you can throw as much logic as you like to them, But actually what will motivate them and what will get them doing things is actually intrinsic motivation, the feelings that come with it. So being able to tell story, being able to articulate a purpose in a way that is relevant for that individual, not for the shareholders, not for the function, not for the leader, but for that employee. And that may be different for different people. Some people may have a high need for consistency. Some people may need a high need for competence. Some people have families that are more important than other people who are more important that they want to, I don't know, travel. Understand your people and articulate things in a way that is emotionally meaningful for them, because then that will be a positive resource in their brain and not corporate spin.
Okay. All right, let's keep away from the red flag corporate spin words. That makes sense to me. Now, one of the things I saw in your correspondence is that you suggest that it takes just one leader to destroy psychological safety in an organization. Just one. How is it so?
Because we assess our environment, we're scanning our environment for potential threats. We assess things vicariously. So you may have the best leader ever, and you may be really happy in your team and feeling quite safe. But you look over to your friend who has a horrible leader who doesn't make them feel safe. And that just diminishes yours a little bit, because what you're thinking is, my organization is allowing that to happen, is allowing that person to be treated in that way. And if they allow my friend to be treated like that, then that could be me. What if I get moved? So your level of psychological safety as an organization, it really is at the level of the least psychological safe leader, because people see it. And in organizations, people go, I don't want to work for that one. That was a slave driver. You don't want to work for that. That immediately decreases the level of psychological safety. It doesn't necessarily take it away, because I'm all right in my team, but I'm also aware that there is a risk there. What if that new leader takes over my team? What if I have to go there? The fact that that behavior is being allowed. They say there's nothing nothing disengages a good employee more than watching you tolerate a bad one.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, because you just see people getting whipped and you're like, oh, people they don't live up to these proper standards, they just allow these terrible things to happen around them.
Yeah. And then that's a downward cycle, because then if that's allowed, then that's setting, and as a leader, you're a role model and you're setting the behaviors that are tolerated. So that's tolerated. And then it's like one bad apple rots the barrel. In fact, there was some research I just read recently. 2 negative people within a team has the same impact as if the whole team was negative.
That's really amazing.
Yeah, that's Cousy and Holloway's research. So just tolerating those 2 people, their negative attitude, their poor behavior, then it has the same performance impact on the team as if the whole team were that way.
Wow, I always thought that positive emotions were more infectious than negative ones. So maybe I've got some debunking to do with my own understanding. So I thought that was true, except when it came to the leader, and the leader's mood was always more contagious. But what I'm hearing you say is, no, the whole idea of bad apple rots the bunch is incredibly powerful, and that negativity in just 2 people can have terrible repercussions across a team's morale and performance.
Absolutely. And our brain is actually programmed to remember negative emotions more than positive emotions. Again, it's a survival instinct. If you think back on something that happened last week, what you'll remember is something that created an emotional response. You won't remember what you had for breakfast last Tuesday. It'll be, if I say remember something, it will be something that created emotion. And if it created negative emotion, that will be the first memory. The positive emotions might come second, because it's in our survival interest to remember the things that created a negative response than the things that create a positive response, so that we don't do it again or we don't get in that situation. So that's why somebody can give you 9 pieces of great feedback and 1 piece of developmental feedback, and that's the one you remember.
Yeah, it's your threat response going, yeah, I've got to chew on this, otherwise I'm under the pump here. So you're not a fan of binary thinking. Tell us, what is binary thinking and how can we avoid it?
So binary thinking is basically where there's one of two options, black and white, basically. Yes and no, should and shouldn't, must, mustn't, good and bad. And we're actually brought up in a society that is very binary focused. So when we're little, when we're growing up, we're taught that that's good, good boy, good girl, bad, that's bad behavior, that's good behavior. Shouldn't do that, mustn't do that. You go to school, that's reinforced, and top set, bottom sets at education, pass, fail. And then I've even seen organizations with appraisal mechanisms with competent, not competent. I mean, as binary as that. But life's not that binary. And if we think about things in that way, that's a very hard lesson. That's a very hard thing to learn, because what you end up with is good, bad, pass, fail, succeed, or fail. And you end up with this, I either did well or I completely failed. There's nothing in between. And that can deplete your resilience. Because if you think about when you feel when you think of failure or you think you've done bad, your emotions drop. It's very negative. You get the negative response in the body. And that depletes your resources. So convert that and think, you know what? There is stuff in the middle. There's a bit, it doesn't have to be one way or another. And I'm a big advocate of Carol Dweck's growth mindset in terms of, okay, it didn't go as planned. What did I learn? And what can I do differently going forward? And just reframing those things that you beat yourself up about as a learning opportunity and a growth opportunity not only increases your resilience, it increases your mood and your positive emotions and allows you to see that thing less as a threat and more as, I'm going to learn from that. I'm going to do something differently. So if you think about the huge lessons in life, they usually come from things which could be labeled a failure.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. And actually it's a learning. So a recent one for me was that I fell off a climbing wall and ruptured my Achilles tendon.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I know. It was, and loads of people went, "Oh, I bet you won't do that again." That was, that was an epic fail. Well, no, it wasn't. It just taught me my limits. My over-competitive side tried to do something which was beyond my capability at that time. I've learned that I need to do a little bit more practice, a little bit more exercise in order to get up that particular wall. Or I could sit here and go, "I'm never doing it again."
Yeah.
But I'm just closing my world down.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. You talk about keeping a brain diary. What the hell is that? And why would we do it?
Okay, so there's been a lot of work around gratitude diaries as well, in terms of just being thankful for that. But similarly, the brain diary is really, it starts off quite extensive, but once you've got into the rhythm of it, you can reduce it down. But really, the purpose of it is to increase awareness of what your brain is doing. So the first stage in starting to manage your brain is be aware of what's happening. What I suggest you do is that you, first of all, make sure you've done the physical aspects of the brain. So did you eat well today? Did you drink the relevant amount of water? Did you get 8 hours of sleep last night? And just check the basic needs, first of all. Then for that day, then look at the moods, how you've been feeling, and what your brain's threat responses were. When did you get that threat response? When did you start to feel that defensiveness or anger or whatever your threat response is? And have a look at that, write it down, reflect on it, learn from that, and see is there any correlation. So I know that if I don't get 8 hours sleep, and I'm a big food mood person, so I know I need my 8 hours sleep and I know I need to eat regularly. Otherwise, I can't manage things more effectively. And that came from a self-awareness of recognizing that. So the brain diary is spending, a month really noticing the relationship between having a fit brain and how you respond to things, and helping you reflect on responding differently to convert the negative things into positive resources. So the brain diary is really just a mechanism to increase your awareness. I don't expect people will do it forever, but I think it is a tool to enable you to start to understand the mechanics, like we talked about at the beginning, to start to understand the mechanics of the brain and how one thing can lead to another and how you can manage it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like that for developing self-awareness and taking control, one of the 5 C's, back with your own focus and your own resourcefulness here. So I'm curious about this piece that you suggest, that while you advocate for developing resilience, you don't necessarily advocate for a wellness program, a well-being program, I should say, in an organization to affect performance. Why not? And what can we do instead?
Yeah. So I was working with an organization recently, and they had started creating wellness mentors within the organization, which I thought was great. Then they kept saying, and now we've had to increase the wellness mentors by 100%. And I'm like, why? Why do you need to put more people in? What's going on? Well, there's such a demand for the well-being and the wellness mentors. Why is there such a demand? You know, what's happening in the workplace that's causing people now to need this? Now, there are always times in life where we need help, where we need to metaphorically call the mechanic in, okay? And that's okay. But what I'm concerned about is organizations putting wellness programs in and putting a lot of money in to programs in which people, by the time people are referred, it's already too late. Their brain fitness is gone. Their resilience is already gone. And if perhaps they had been led and managed better in the first place, they wouldn't need to go to the wellness program. And there's lots of research showing the resilience programs and the wellness programs that people go on are not that effective, because often at the point they go on, their brain is not in a position to learn or take things on because the brain isn't fit. Their resources are already depleted. They're already on a stress response. They're struggling to learn new stuff. Anyway, it's too late. We should be taking preventative measures, and a wellness program does not exonerate leadership from leading well in the first place and preventing people from needing well-being programs. So I'm not saying scrap them, because there are points in life where we all need them, but don't use them as an excuse for poor leadership.
Well, I think it comes back to the statistics you wrote at the beginning, or said at the beginning, that 60% of psychological safety comes from the environment, which includes the leader, but it's also about how you set up and run your workplace. And 40% is around the self-control and self-management piece. So that totally makes sense. You can't just put all your eggs in the 40% and say, it's your fault, your problem, you deal with it. It's a whole system in which we operate that needs to be addressed.
I think there's a good case for, and I have done a lot of working with employees to talk to them about the mechanics of the brain, to enable them to do their 40%. But do it at a point where they're not already in a heap with depleted resources. Because when your cortisol is high and you're already with depleted resources, learning is not the body's priority. You expect people to learn when they're already depleted of resources. Rather, do it as a proactive approach where we go, yeah, we will put this well-being thing in place, but while you're all doing okay, here's some toolkit, here's tools to enable you to make sure that you don't need it, really.
Yeah, perfect. So Sam, you've got 2 books out. You've got Rise and Rise Together. Can you tell us a little bit about your books?
Yeah. So the books are based on my research, 3 years research in fast-moving environments. It's based on the findings around psychological safety and resilience. So the Rise book is written for individuals or employees and is a toolkit for keeping your brain fit and the things that you can do as an individual to take control and manage your own psychological safety and well-being. Rise Together was written specifically for leaders to talk about how they can create an environment in which allows people to rise, allows people to perform well, and what leaders need to do in order to create that environment. That's the 60% piece. So together, they're kind of like sister books, but one's from a leadership perspective and one is from an employee perspective.
That's great. I love your research tagging those two things together, psychological safety and resilience. I think that's absolutely brilliant. I look forward to reading the books. Sam, where can people find you?
They can find me at I have a website, drsammather.com. That's drsammather.com. And the books are available, the usual retailers, Amazon, or if you want to support your local book seller, go along and they will order it for you.
Fantastic. Sam, this has been really enlightening. Thank you so much. Scribbled a whole bunch of notes on stuff I didn't know before, which is amazing. And I think I love the practical tools that you shared with us and the great insights about how leaders and individuals can get their brain fitness up and create better places to work. So thank you so much for sharing all your insight and wisdom.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Sally.
That was a fun and detailed conversation with Dr. Sam. I loved it. I guess the key takeaways for me are the 5 C's, the need for connectedness, control, competence, consistency, and cause in order to build psychological safety and also to avoid the triggers into an amygdala hijack. So that's really cool. That expanded a little bit more of the neuroscience knowledge I had previously. So that's really nice to get some finessing around that. And the other key takeaway is the balance of the 60-40. 60% of psychological safety comes from the environment, including what the leader does, and 40% from the individual self-management of their own brain fitness, as well as their inner resourcefulness. It was also a surprise to me to learn that these resources are finite, that we actually tap out at some point if we feel like our brain is being assaulted in too many directions, on too many levels, in too many directions. There you go. Those were the key takeaways for me, and I hope you got some wonderful insights as well. Just a reminder of hopping on to our website, zoerouth.com, click on programs, click on events, and join us for one of our upcoming events, either in person if you're in Canberra or visiting, or online so we can reach more people around the globe. I would love to connect with you personally. It's my pleasure to be of service to you, and these are really important topics that every leader needs to master. So I hope to see you there soon. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.